5, 10 years ago, I don't think you would have said, oh, a good ATS should help you deliver a great candidate experience. We were always thinking about features for the HR team, for talent acquisition, for recruiters. That's not the case anymore. I think in order to be a good ATS in the space, you have to be able to create a compelling candidate experience.
The candidate experience is going to be paramount in today's market and going forward. And the simpler, the better the application process. I think that the days of filling out pages and pages of applications and frustrations around the application process, that's where I believe the applicant tracking system is headed. It is becoming more of a simpler process where resumes are being scraped, data is being fed into the applicant system, and it's less and less tedious for the job seeker.
The ATS can have an even bigger impact on things like finding qualified candidates or finding candidates outside of traditional recruitment channels. It's always going to be, you have multiple tools in the toolkit, right? And so it's got to be a balance between the human side of recruiting and then where some of this technology can help.
Someone came to us today, they've had a position out for 2 weeks and they've gotten 18 applications. I think it depends on the role. I think it depends on how it's advertised and how the job description's written.
What about on the flip side of that? I've seen job postings where all of a sudden it says like 702 applicants. Is it even worth applying at that point?
I think it is, because
really,
if you think you're a qualified candidate, you have no idea who the other candidates are.
I think that's where some of this technology can help make a more efficient screening process too, because right, like whether you're the first person or the 702nd person to apply, you might be just as qualified. So the technology to help you identify those qualified candidates quickly is so critical. That's why I think that's where things like video interviews, assessments, like some of the stuff that's starting to come out more and more, I think that's where you can apply that. And it's not right for every role, but for certain roles, especially those with a high inbound candidate volume, I think those tools can be particularly effective.
It isn't always, hey, we've got the job description and this is who we want. Sometimes through the process, it evolves as they start seeing candidates and reassessing. We may not need this particular skill or qualification that we thought we needed, and that may change the path of the hiring.
Typically, the model now is going out and hunting for the candidates that are actively not searching. They're passively.
They're passive. Yeah.
They're the passive candidates. Those are the prime candidates that most companies want to go after.
So the passive candidate is already employed someplace else. Is that what you mean?
Exactly right.
I would think with Zoom right now, it's leading into video. We've hired people that we haven't met in person just because of the pandemic. I think, Zoe, you've had the same experience, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the reality of video as part of the hiring process isn't as foreign as it may have been a year or two ago. And yes, it's a new technique. But it's understandable why it is a tool in the toolkit for hiring.
Given the pandemic and the fact that most people are remote, I do think moving forward, video is going to be right for some roles and not right for others. Mm-hmm. I think, for a more senior position, if you're hiring for a CFO, I think you're going to want to meet that person. I think you're going to want them to meet with different people in the organization. You might want to be able to have a live face-to-face meeting or have them meet with members of the team. If you're hiring a ton of business development reps and very entry-level roles where you're constantly going to be hiring at a high volume for them, I think like video seems like a no-brainer, right? To have that be the technique that you use to screen and get through those candidates. So I think I think we're in for a totally different work and hiring experience as we come out of the pandemic. I think it'll also kind of put a strain on HR and talent teams, quite honestly, because they're going to have to be thinking about how to build that culture and that employee experience in a remote environment. So, it's an opportunity for a lot of creativity and rethinking the ways that we sort of build culture within work organizations, but it's definitely a tough task, I think.
The culture rebuild is something that we've had to really start thinking about as far as going back to the office. We talked a lot about culture and the life at the office and how it was a great place and a thriving organization. Then we had to change that when we went virtual. And now going back, it's going to be a little bit of a culture shock. If we go to a hybrid model, some people are in the office, some people are out of the office. I've hired people on my own team I've never met ever. And that's a shock.
But we had a company that I believe we were their first ATS. They hadn't used the technology before, and they were a healthy fast food chain, sort of like a drive-through concept. And they did all of their hiring on sort of on-site events. So having like a ton of people in to do a live interview, and then they'd have quick conversations and hire staff. And that's how they would add staff to new locations and restaurants. So pretty quickly, they had to go entirely remote. And that's where something like those video interviews where they could have quick 15-minute conversations with candidates, see their personality, still retain some of that sort of in-person experience, but pivot really quickly across, a bunch of different locations in order to continue to staff up during the pandemic. That, to me, that was like the success story where I was like, oh, okay, this can work. This technology can actually help people.
We've got tens of thousands of candidates in our database. And for us to go through for all the different companies we're working for, we're matching up not only their skills, but also their personalities based upon what we're told about the culture of a company. So it's based upon our pre-screening candidates and having ongoing conversations and remembering as many people as we can. Now, luckily, this system helps us remember those conversations because we track them. But we're not just looking for one brand. We're not just looking for one culture, which, having these systems really helps us be able to do a better match than we would otherwise.
It has to be seamless because people expect it to work like all of their other technology solutions in the workplace do. And you need to be able to log in and immediately, you can't have a disruption in hiring just because you're switching your ATS. I think actually the technology has gotten much better just across the entire field. It's pretty easy now to migrate data in. It's more about what kind of onboarding experience do you want? Do you want more of a self-guided experience? Do you want, a dedicated account manager and customer service, customer success type of plan?
I have spent countless hours putting ATSs in place. And the worst case scenario is if you're going from one ATS to another, that is a very tedious task. But putting one in from scratch, that's a little bit easier. It is still about the data. It is still about the metrics and measuring that. And I think it's all about the features you're going to want and how it's interfacing with, say, an HRIS system, the human resources system, how that interfaces. I've been in places where there's standalone ATSs, and then I've been in places where they want the ATS to talk to the HR system.
If you want to have that personal connection with candidates, you can make the technology work with you to do that, but that you have to sort of commit to that process. Once you've disqualified a candidate, are you reaching out to them to let them know, hey, you're no longer part of the process and thank you so much for your time? And how timely is that follow-up and response? How personalized is it? Are you providing them with feedback in that email? If it's weeks later after they've had their most recent interview, or it's 5 minutes after they walk out the door, that's going to make it hard for you to connect with that candidate in a meaningful way.
They have to keep that personal touch to keep the candidate experience intact. And I think that the ATS at times can take away from that by creating these template emails and just a less human touch. So I think a good ATS will keep that process intact.
It has to do with the candidate experience and the commitment a company has towards that candidate experience. It's the people part of it. I think Matt's point's spot on as far as, there are black holes, and, it's the company's responsibility to look at that candidate experience. You get into senior candidates presenting to a team where they're given an assignment and then they share their thoughts or ideas so that hiring managers can get a sense of problem solving and someone's thinking and what it would be like to actually work with them. Some companies use those personality tests before they actually even speak with people. And they're assessing very wide concepts like curiosity and some bigger ideas.
One of their assessments is a personality assessment, but the way they position it to candidates, we're trying to figure out how best to fit you in with the team. So it's less about, oh, is it pass fail and how did you do and will you get the job? And more about, okay, you're an extrovert, so let's figure out how this team environment should actually work with that skill set. So I think there's other ways to position some of this work too, so that it feels less like homework or less like a pass-fail test for the candidate and more about creating an engaging work experience for them once they've joined the organization.
Some companies are their assessment of candidates is decentralized so that a candidate could apply for a similar role several times during a year and it doesn't get flagged necessarily because each role is considered its own set of candidates. So it won't go up. That person already applied 5 times.
In our system, it will tell you, this candidate has applied for a few other roles, so that it's flagged. If you happen to apply to 2 or 3 roles at once, 2 or 3 similar roles, you'll be at least the recruiter in the system will be able to see, oh, okay, this person is advanced to the interview stage in this pipeline and they're at the screening stage in this pipeline. So at least you're not in a situation where you're getting 2 different offers from 2 different teams at the same company. Many of the ATSs that I've seen will have that built in. So you'll be able to see, like, are there candidates that are slipping away that I haven't reached out to? Is there a to-do list based on candidates in a specific job stage? Did I leave someone hanging? Do I have an interview coming up? Have I sent the email I was meant to send? So I think there are various layers of reminders, and all of that communication is centralized within the system. So in theory, you can go into any job and understand what communication you've had with each candidate in that specific pipeline.
Mm-hmm. I would think that for the better recruiters, if they're seeing something in you as a candidate, that even if you're not perfect for that position, and let's say you're a little bit over the salary range, I've had this happen to me where they'll just call and have a conversation anyway, and they'll just be very honest about what the salary range is. That's okay. I mean, personally, I'd rather have it at bat for that than not at all.
That's exactly right. I think that the recruiters will have that narrative and the dialogue with the candidate to find out more about their salary, if there's any flexibility on it.
One thing we haven't talked about yet today, but I also think is important to think about, is how can this technology help with diversity, equity, and inclusion? Having a tool, pressing a button somewhere, it's not going to magically make the organization more diverse or more inclusive. So it starts with executive buy-in. It starts with accountability. And I think a big piece of that is measuring the right data. It becomes this gap where you don't even know how your company is performing relative to certain DEI initiatives because you just don't have that data. So I think that's key, having a system that will allow you to track how you're doing across the hiring pipeline so you can identify those gaps. I do think the technology is also getting to a place where you can start to do even more. So things like anonymizing names and phone numbers and birthdays on a resume, for example, so that when you first get that batch of resumes in, all you're looking at is experience. You're not seeing the name, you're not seeing the age. You're trying to scramble some of that data so that you can try and mitigate some of that unconscious bias that we might have. The final piece of how systems can help with this, finding passive candidates, going out and sourcing candidates that are the right fit. Some of it's finding other creative ways to find those candidates and fill the pipeline. You have to change up the method. You have to go and seek out those candidates.